Hi, this is Aryeh Cohen-Wade. I'm the host of Culturally Determined, and my guest today is Max Reed. Max, can you please introduce yourself?
Max Reed. I have a newsletter called Read Max, which is, yes, a pun on my name. And I'm a former writer and editor for New York Magazine and Gawker, among other places.
Thanks for coming on. So, congrats on launching the newsletter, and you have maybe the best newsletter title possible out there. And so, the link
Thank
that will
you.
be below. It's maxread.substack.com, although it's called Readmax. And yeah, you were sort of out of the game at least for a little bit. I missed seeing your byline. So happy that you're writing again because I think you're I've always enjoyed your pieces, and you were on a couple of years ago. I just
Thank you.
watched to listen a little bit of it where we were talking about when Kanye met Trump in the Oval Office. So that was like a simpler, more innocent time.
Yeah.
So I encourage people to check out your Substack where you're writing about tech and media, but also just doing things more along your personal interests, and including a very fun piece that hopefully we'll get to talk about a little bit. That was about the category of movies, 90s dad thrillers, which you sort of label and categorize in various ways, and is both like fun and made me want to rewatch some of these movies like Air Force One and all sorts of strange movies where like a normal person is somehow a normal man is somehow conscripted into like fighting evildoers. And but we'll get to that. But we're going to start with a piece that you wrote that just came out recently. What happened to BuzzFeed? And that is not there's not a question mark in there. It's a statement. What happened to BuzzFeed? And you explain it. And so BuzzFeed just had its IPO, and I guess it was disappointing because I don't know, it was mispriced or something. But people were maybe surprised by that, or maybe they shouldn't have been. But you did an analysis of sort of the online media landscape um, that I found really interesting, and you've been in that world for a long time. So what happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point it's probably not right to say like, from last week to, or from 2 weeks ago to the BuzzFeed IPO, disappointment is probably not the right word. I think it kind of did what everybody expected it to do, which is it debuted and it dropped a little bit. And there's a whole kind of total mess with former employees who want to sell their shares and are unable to. That seems to just be a kind of I don't know, some level of incompetency across several different institutions, including BuzzFeed. But compared with where we were 10 years ago, or where BuzzFeed was 10 years ago, I think it's a huge disappointment. I mean, I think the thing to remember is that they, according to all the best reporting, there was a $1 billion purchase offer on the table from Disney. That Disney wanted to buy BuzzFeed. This would have been in 2013, I think. And Jonah Peretti said no. John Steinberg, who was the head of the business side of the operation at that time, left shortly afterwards, basically over that decision. I'm sort of I don't know which parts of what I'm saying right now are just gossip and which parts of what I'm saying are like reported things. So, but it's 10 years ago and it's media, so who gives a shit? But the idea when you walk away from $1 billion deal is that you are creating something that's going to be worth a lot more than that someday. And BuzzFeed's market cap is currently less than $1 billion, and its stock is trading at somewhere between $5 and $7 right now. And I think that I tried to avoid using this phrase in my piece, but it's hard for me not to look at this as the kind of end of an era, or like, let's say, a capstone on a particular era. I came of age professionally, starting around 2009, 2010. I started working at Gawker in 2010 and left in 2015. And those 5 years were among the most exciting, strange, dynamic, but sort of optimistic years to be in digital media. You don't want to overrate the kind of feeling like it could be a punishing and brutal job, and it was precarious for people who were on the lowest rungs of the ladder. But there was a huge amount of Silicon Valley money that was being invested in at the time. I mean, relatively huge. The reason for that being basically that the sort of infrastructure of media distribution was changing. It had changed from 10 years previously, the invention of the iPhone, the invention of Facebook, of Twitter, had all changed how people were getting news, media of all kinds. And there was a lot of investors who said, okay, well, we can make money off of this. And this story has been told a lot. So people who are sort of familiar with the media business have heard it said a million times before. But basically between 2010 and 2014, Facebook by itself increased the amount of traffic to a bunch of media websites by an order of magnitude, essentially. That it just sort of, because Facebook had such a huge user base, and because it had captured that user base so effectively, it could start to send traffic to us all over the place. It was very easy at the time to sort of think to yourself, well, this is the way it's going to be forever. I mean, you could certainly, if you were talking to an investor, that's what you would say, like forever and ever, we're going to be getting hundreds of millions of users every year. Millions of people are going to be looking at this stuff. Like, we are the new New York Times. And BuzzFeed at this point was kind of the most obsessed over property in that collection of new digital media spaces. The New York Times sort of famously put together a big digital strategy memo, basically thanks to BuzzFeed's runaway success. The sort of the most prestigious publication in the country is looking at BuzzFeed and thinking, well, what are we doing that this meme factory is not?
Was that the thing that the younger Sulzberger was spearheading? That thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Who is now the publisher?
I had a name that I'm totally forgetting now.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, he is now the publisher.
And then it's funny to think how the relative, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, the New York Times saw like BuzzFeed, its rearview mirror was like, oh, these guys are going to overtake us. And for various reasons, maybe we can discuss, now the New York Times is once again a behemoth. I mean, it's not a publicly traded company, so I don't know if it has like a public valuation, but I guess it has this like weird stock system that's I don't understand or something. So maybe it's possible to say, but it's New York Times is now much more consolidated and powerful than it was a decade ago, and BuzzFeed is not has not become Disney. And actually, I'm just going to read a couple lines from the piece. You say, "Boy, what a decade it's been. 10 years ago, when I still worked at Gawker, digital media was becoming a hot target for investments, and blogging began to seem less like a doomed and precarious endeavor and more like a potentially stable, if not wildly well-remunerated career. The people who signed the checks took for granted that legacy media companies were done, that digital media companies would build a future, and no one knew precisely what it would look like." And then you jump ahead a little bit, and you actually link to a piece that you wrote for Gawker with Leah Finnegan, who is now the editor-chief of the rebooted Gawker, talking about various media brands from 2014. I glanced at, and there's a couple I didn't even remember their names. So some of them have vanished entirely, and then there's some other ones that have moved up in the world. And then you talk about how there's been this incredible amount of consolidation within online media, such that you label 4 major like conglomerates, which are BuzzFeed, HuffPost, Complex, Vox, Verge, SB Nation, Eater, New York Magazine, Bustle, Mike, Gawker, and Vice Foundry 29. And so where there once what would have been 20 or so, now there's 4. And there, it seems like you're arguing the piece that sort of like the fact that the BuzzFeed stock went down instead of going up means that further consolidation within the industry is going to be coming, and maybe it'll just be like 2 giant conglomerates controlling all online media.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of stealing this thesis from a newsletter called The Diff, but Jonah Peretti, who's the founder and CEO of BuzzFeed, has been saying for a long time that consolidation is the only path forward for digital media companies. Basically, because in order for you to get your foot in the door with advertisers, to compete with companies the size of Facebook and Twitter, to have the kind of diversified sort of revenue streams and audience that allows you to weather changes in algorithm, changes in the economy, all kinds of things, you need to be as big as you can possibly get. It's easier to consolidate like that when you are a publicly traded company, because you can make offers in stock. You can buy companies by giving them some stock. So I think that's one reason that that's one reason why it was important for BuzzFeed to go public. But the sort of the kind of paradox here is that the thesis about consolidation is proven in particular by BuzzFeed stock doing poorly, which makes it also sort of more difficult to make offers and to play the suitor and to purchase companies. So in the short term, it certainly doesn't look great for BuzzFeed, but I think in the medium and long term, like this does probably position it best to lead a bunch of acquisitions, necessary acquisitions. I mean, I'll note, like, in the time between when I published that newsletter and when we're having this conversation, Vox / New York Mag / Eater just announced that it had purchased Group 9, which is the company that owns the Dodo and Thrillist and Pop Sugar and a couple other brands. So, this is just going to keep happening. Like I say in the piece, like, I don't know that this is necessarily the most sort of depressing, but it's not necessarily pessimistic. I think that, there are probably 2 or 3 that will survive in the long term, and they will provide relatively stable careers for people who stick around for them. I don't personally worry about like some huge culling of jobs across the industry, especially because most of these shops are unionized now. So at the very least, there's some level of worker say in the decisions that are being made. But it's not the thing that keeps striking me. And the thing that I think was at the core of what I wanted to write about was the shift in sort of tone and glamour almost. I don't want to pretend that we were, bloggers were glamorous in 2011, but it was a different kind of job and it was a different kind of industry. And it's whatever it was back then, it certainly isn't anymore.
Right. Well, glamour is interesting. And I was working at Gawker, probably not glamorous, but you could say there was some sort of mystique or something to it, such that people really want to do it. And then you link to this piece that has stuck with me ever since it was published, and it was a woman writing a letter to like a self-help sort of thing or advice columnist about how she hated her life because she didn't work for BuzzFeed, and that is an emblematic letter from a certain era. And I remember after I read that, I was like, God, this woman needs to talk to a therapist. Like, she seems to be deeply depressed and like, displacing all of her mental problems onto the fact that she doesn't work for BuzzFeed. But it's impossible to imagine someone writing something like that, even though that was like a weird outlier today. And then so, you yourself and many other people who once were employed by a site like this, Glenn Greenwald will be one of them, and Matt Iglesias and other such people, they now are on Substack. And does Substack have a glamour or mystique or something? It's weird because anyone can do it in some respect, but it's at least the hot new thing somehow.
I mean, I've been writing about, I think there's probably like a couple different ways to answer that. I think that, like, definitely in terms of, and let's just, we're talking vibes now, Aryeh. This is like a vibes conversation. In terms of like energy, I think Substack's kind of where a lot of like editorial energy is going, where there's a lot of interesting people. I will say, without even being a homer for the platform, given that I am currently on it, that I have found more new writers and interesting voices on Substack than I have over the 3 or 4 years previously. It just feels like, I mean, something I miss a lot about, let's say, something I miss a lot about the late 2000s, early 2010s era of internet writing is something that I hope that, Blogging Heads listeners would appreciate and remember, is there was just this huge flowering of people you'd never heard of, talking about stuff that you didn't know anything about. It was an amazing place to like sort of learn. And I think Substack has some of that energy, that sort of early blogging. I mean, I'm not the first person to say this either. Like, it's probably a cliche about Substack at this point. But I think that what Substack doesn't have that I can see really is and this is where I'm going to start to sound like really old and corny, but like, there's no like youthful energy to it. Like, I think that what Gawker had and what BuzzFeed even did to some extent, though it was a kind of particularly corny youthful energy, was a sense that this was what interesting, smart, cool, like people in their early 20s were doing. Obviously it was like, if you were actually cool, you weren't blogging, you were doing something else, but there was like a coolness to it. And I don't think Substack really has that. I think, I think sort of there's clearly a lot of, excuse me, a lot of would-be coolness in like Web3 creating. I have a sort of crackpot theory that like a huge amount of what made early blogs so good in I'm talking about Gawker, Jezebel, even the New York Mag's early blogs, was you had a lot of freelance writing talent of that was essentially comedians and comedy writers who couldn't find work elsewhere, and so were willing to do funny things for the blogs. And I say that because I remember starting in the sort of mid 2000s when I was trying to hire writers for Gawker, I was finding constantly that writers whose work I had come across and who had really strong voices and who I liked a lot were all trying to get jobs in TV. And in fact, that there were now a ton of, thanks I think to like Netflix and all the streaming services, there were a ton of jobs in TV. No way of proving this theory, but my theory is basically that like the rise of streaming services and the expansion of TV jobs meant that there was a lot of writing talent went to where the money was and disappeared from where the money wasn't, which was essentially news media.
That's interesting. Yeah, and Cord Jefferson is one person. Well, he at Gawker, and he now
he became a TV writer. I mean, there's a lot of bloggers who are TV writers, and it's the other way around too, where it's like people who wrote a handful of blogs became, Julianne Smolinski, who is like a wonderful TV writer, extremely funny woman who has been writing for Grace and Frankie for years. She was like a really common byline across New York Mag and the Gawker blogs for a long time, and the kind of person who I think of when it was like, that was the kind of thing you could read, very funny, professionally funny people writing stuff, off the cuff, that now it's that, not that it's easy, but it's that much easier to get a job as a staff writer, for a Netflix show or Hulu show or whatever.
Yeah, so that's interesting. And just in terms of vibes, and so non-scientific, Substack seems more older millennial Gen X friendly, and the name and Greenwald, Iglesias, Andrew Sullivan, all Gen X, and people who came up through the early blogosphere went into some establishment. I mean, Sullivan is somewhat different because he was like the 26-year-old editor of the New Republic, but early bloggers went to mainstream media and now leaving to do their own thing. And then the cool young people, well, I have no association with young people or cool people, but I would think they are maybe doing TikTok, podcasts, which, somewhat similar to Substack, is like unconstrained by an editor or any institution. And so that's where the youthful energy maybe is. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that I can't believe I didn't mention podcasts, because I think that's the other, like, as you just said, podcast is the other totally the place where a huge amount of like talent that would otherwise, that had it emerged in 2009, 2010 would have been blogging, prime sort of blogging talent, is doing podcasts now, and which is 100% understandable. Not that it's easier. It's just like, it's obvious it's a lot easier to make money off of a Patreon than for a podcast that you're doing than it is to like make money as a freelance writer for a bunch of different publications right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's different skill sets for sure, and there's a type of person who loves writing and doesn't want to speak out loud, on in front of a microphone or something. And I certainly feel more comfortable at this point in my life babbling into a microphone than writing polished prose or semi-polished prose that would be published on a blog like 10 or 15 years ago, or I guess maybe more like 5 to 10 years ago.
Sure.
But yeah, okay. And so one company that you did not mention when you named your 4 conglomerates is G/O Media. Is that how you say, or just GO Media, which is the remnants of Gawker? And we couldn't put it. It's not on the level of one of those, but do you have any idea what is happening with GO Media? And I joked on Twitter recently,
as far as I can,
that it was like some sort of internal plot to like ruin the company and like drive it into bankruptcy. Was like being there was like psychopaths within the company who are trying to destroy it from within. That's the only thing I can explain for these, like, they're driving away all their talent. They did this bizarre thing where they eliminated all the images from Onion articles before like 2019. So that's like, years and years of like effort put in by photo editors and designers and stuff. It's just seemingly all gone to save space on like the servers or something. It's utterly baffling.
From what I can tell, and I'm not an expert in this stuff, but it seems like a very classic sort of even stereotypical private equity play that I can't remember the name of the company that owns Geo, but it was purchased by a private equity firm. And the way I understand private equity works, especially with media, is you take an asset like a local newspaper or a network of blogs that there are some obvious costs you can shave without taking too big of a hit to your revenue in the short term. And you sort of do that to squeeze as much blood from the stone as you possibly can. You get as many profits, and then you sell it on again, or maybe you just slowly wind it down in the medium to long term. I want to be careful here, like, because I don't like. I think the super stereotypical version is like, yeah, they don't give a shit. They're going to make 5 years worth of money out of it and then like sell it and walk away. And I don't think it's quite how it works, but I think it's basically like the game is how little can we spend on in this company to continue making like money off of it. And that's why like it just is basically incompetently run. I mean, it's incompetently run on the tech side. All the images experience incompetently run on the editorial side. It just sucks now. It's incompetently run on the advertising side. It's if you try to load those sites, they're just like caked with ads. It's impossible. They start the fan on your computer immediately.
So for people don't know, this is the remnants of Gawker after Gawker went into bankruptcy, and then Gawker basically like headline Gawker, or the main site, sort of turned to something called Splinter, and then Splinter everyone was like folded, and then they destroyed Deadspin, and all the Deadspin writers quit and formed. A lot of them went to this site they formed themselves that was owned jointly called Defector. And then there was a piece a couple of weeks ago in Gawker about how like 75% of Jezebel's writers had left. And it just seems like, they have all these and something else with The Onion. They were forcing all the Onion writers. The Onion has been located in Chicago for a very long time, like over a decade. They were like forcing all of them to move to Los Angeles. This is the Onion AV Club because like that's where Hollywood is. And it just seemed like they're just driving out the talent because you have to pay talented people a bit more than minimum wage. That it does seem like blood from a stone kind of thing. And then there'll be some husk and it'll be like Thought Catalog or something in the end, like just generating a little revenue from like confused people clicking on it or something. So it's just
right.
It's depressing, I guess. But many things in media, online media, at least, are depressing. Okay, anything else on this topic before we move to another? What are the pieces that you've written recently?
No, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned Defector. I mean, it's about the only bright spot I can think of in terms of just having like the kind of classic, funny, interesting, bright, sort of surprising content that you used to be able to expect from blogs in general. That they are a successful company. It's a sustainable writers co-op. I encourage listeners who haven't heard of it to check it out if you like sports, even if you don't like sports, because they cover a lot of different things. But it's work. It's like owned by the guys who left, the men and women who left Deadspin, and they're doing a really good job with it. Not going to buy anything anytime soon, but it's a good site.
Yeah, and maybe that the model, and so you also the previous the 7 to 10 to 12 years ago, it was like the venture capital era in media, and now it's the private equity era. And so before it was a bubble and things were invested in on like a 1 in 100 sort of, with venture capital, you'd only need a couple successes that are super successes, and then all your failures, 97 failures get wiped out if you invested in a site that becomes $1 billion, whatever that, that is rare. You're not going to get many $1 billion things in media, not even BuzzFeed. And now it's more like the the penny pinchers and squeezing and leaving the desiccated husk sort of era. So there's like irrational exuberance in that, and now like the
exactly
green eye shade like sociopaths are like cutting. That's how it seems from the outside. Okay, so you wrote a piece called "Is Web3 Bullshit?" and the subhead is that even the right question? And so Web3, there's probably people who have seen that term and don't know what it means or have never even heard before. So, and part of the piece is trying to define what Web3 is in some way. And so what is Web3, and is Elon Musk right that it's bullshit?
So Web3 is, like, I think the most neutral basic definition is that it is the coming era of the internet on the blockchain. So the idea is it's everything you know and love and possibly all the stuff you hate about the internet now, but it's built on the blockchain, which is, of course, the sort of software framework that was invented to create Bitcoin. And the idea is it's like a distributed, unfakeable, unchangeable ledger that tells you who owns what in a given system. I think like when I say it's the web on the blockchain, the fact that that's vague, I think to people who are pushing Web3 is a feature, not a bug. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And in a lot of ways, I think maybe the like accurate definition is it's a kind of rebranding of crypto for humanities majors. I'm not sure that there's anything going on. It's not clear to me there's anything going on with Web3, such as it is, that's really any different from what Bitcoin enthusiasts were promising and suggesting as far back as 2012. The big development has been the sort of smart contract framework of Ethereum, which just basically allows you to take a certain number of sort of blockchain concepts and apply them beyond just the idea of a currency, so that you can create groups that are governed by contracts that trigger based on software. And so the promise there is that, like you and I, we start a group, a decentralized autonomous organization, as they're called, and we set up basically a constitution for it, and things that, and we don't have to worry about trusting each other because the software constitution will trigger based on whatever changes are going on. And I think, all of this sounds like even I'm boring myself even as I'm saying it out loud, and I think that if you're an English major, like I was, say, or if you're like an artist or a musician or somebody, a lot of this sounds, it's like hard to kind of understand how or why that helps you. And I think a lot of what Web3 is it's like a set of ideas and a framework for thinking about the blockchain that makes it attractive to people who can create cool cultural objects. And like really specifically, what I think what the attractiveness is that it promises people the ability to make money from creating art or from doing positive things, which is like, if you're a musician online, like that, there's not a lot of ways to make money, or if you're an artist online, there's not a lot of ways to make money. And so if you associate Web3 with the ability to sell your art and to make money, that's great. And if you are, and also if you are somebody who just likes to make money, then it all sounds great. But I've already like it's so funny to me because so much of what you think about Web3 and what a person understands about it depends on how closely or distantly they've been following cryptocurrency or internet culture at all over the last 10 years. So it's possible I'm even in just trying to give this shallow definition, I'm already out in the deep end for what is for some people the total deep end, and they're just
okay. Well, okay. So I'm I'm definitely in the kiddie pool in terms of my understanding this, but okay. So the distributed whatever is also DAO, and you wrote an explainer on DAO a couple of months ago, right? So we'll include the link to that. And then it maybe the first time this broke through into the public consciousness in any way was a group of people assembled to try to bid for a copy of an original copy of the U.S. Constitution, or was it Declaration of Independence? It was Declaration of Independence, right? Oh no, it was Constitution. Okay,
it was the Constitution. Yeah.
Okay, at Sotheby's or something, and so I guess it was a way that they could all agree to put money in, but the money wouldn't be stolen by a scammer that maybe would have happened if this sort of effort had been tried 10 years ago or something. But and then they ended up not winning, so just some rich asshole ended up outbidding them. But they said somehow assembled $40 million from people both putting in a lot of money or like $50 or something, and then they were going to vote on what to do with it.
Yeah.
So there's some sort of like it's somehow like has at least under the idea that there could be like a democratic element, like everyone has to agree to something, or 50% or more have to agree to something, and then that triggers something to happen instead of just like one central authority making these decisions. Is that all more or less right?
Yeah, that's totally right. I mean, it's very similar, a DAO, which I think is the current. So if I can, at the risk of overcomplicating things, but I think the sort of the era of Web3, the interest in Web3 really kicked off with the NFT craze earlier this year, which I assume that even the most kind of blockchain skeptical have heard of. That the idea of purchasing artificially scarce digital art there's this huge market for it. There kind of still is. It's not quite as big as it used to be. The next wave of sort of that was the first wave of kind of Web3 implementation or publicity or whatever you would want to say. The next wave is this idea of the DAO, of the DAO, the decentralized autonomous organization. And it's a difficult thing to sort of wrap your arms around, or maybe I should say it's not. On the one hand, it looks and feels basically like a joint stock corporation. I mean, that's what it is. That you have a organization that everybody is bought into based on cryptocurrency tokens on the blockchain, and based on the number of tokens you own, depending on how the DAO is structured, you get to vote on actions that it would take, which is more or less how a joint stock corporation works. And just like a joint stock corporation, you can sell your tokens the same way you can sell stocks, like on the open market. Where it sort of differs, I suppose, where it differs, one, is that it's not regulated. At some point, it seems very clear the SEC considers these tokens securities, or wants to consider them securities, and so it will get regulated the way an LLC, like any kind of public corporation would. But the culture of it pushes the cooperative aspect much more than your average Fortune 500 company, for obvious reasons. So I think you want to think about it a little bit as a joint stock corporation. You want to think about it a little bit as like a co-op of some kind. And then you also probably want to think about it a little bit as a pyramid scheme, because right now nobody is quite sure what to do with any of these things. The Constitution DAOs that you're talking about garnered a ton of attention, and it got a ton of money, and then it couldn't even buy the Constitution. And so it's sort of like they had $40 million just sitting on the blockchain somewhere. And then the part of the whole stupid thing was they tried to return the money, and it's very expensive to transfer money right now on the blockchain. So a lot of people lost their money.
I didn't hear that aspect of it. So people who put in $1,000 thinking that they were purchasing 1/100,000th of a share in a copy of the U.S. Constitution, they're not getting their money back.
They're getting some of it back, but it took a while, and they lost a lot of it because like I said, it costs a lot of money to transfer money on the blockchain right now. Look, I think even the deepest Web3 adherents would tell you that it is not ready for prime time, in the sense that there's just no, you're not going to get a regular person to download a cryptocurrency wallet, to learn their hash, to understand how to do it. And then even if you get them to do all those things, if you tell them that in order to spend $100 on the blockchain, you might have to also spend $125 in fees to spend that $100. I've already lost like $50 trying to do stuff myself because I didn't understand it. And even now that I do understand it, just trying to familiarize myself with the technology, I'm spending more money than I should. And I run a newsletter. There's no way for me to get reimbursed on any of this.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, okay. You're taking a hit in order to spread knowledge to the normal people. There's parts of it, I don't know. A couple of years ago, I would have said, well, this all seems like stupid and a joke, the crypto world. And obviously, if I had bought, so if I put $100 into Bitcoin 3 years ago, I would now have $1,000 or something. The prices generate, but Bitcoin itself has become, massively valuable. And then it'll drop 20%, and then it goes back up 15%. And I don't know, but it seems insane. But it's somewhere between a pyramid scheme, or musical chairs or something, or hot potato, or it seems like someone has to be left carrying the bag, because ultimately this seems to have no true value. I don't know. But in terms of stuff like there is self-executing contracts and stuff, it's something that is sort of like a joint stock corporation. There actually is something that enforces contracts pretty well, and that's the U.S. legal system. And that you get, and with as many problems, if two people pull up sign a contract and get it notarized or whatever, and then one of them violates it, it will, they can go to court and get the original contract enforced more or less, and then there's no risk of the money being stolen by a hacker or something like that. So they're trying to somehow sludge together systems that English common law sort of figured out hundreds of years ago, and that's what it seems to me, at least. Am I misunderstanding it, or?
Yeah, no, I think that the critique that it is basically reverse engineering, like the financial system that has taken 500 or 600 years to get going, is probably true. I think let me try and like there there as you say, one thing that the U.S. court system actually manages to do. I mean, it's not just like there is like I'm always a little bit baffled by the theory of power that is involved in blockchain people. Like, I understand, I don't have any illusions about the court system. I understand that what guarantees it is that the US government has an army. Like, there is like the violence at the bottom there. And so when people are like, no, no, the software controls it, but like, does the software have a gun? Does the software have a tank? Does it have it's
we might be heading.
several aircraft carriers in the Pacific? Well,
no, I mean,
but there is a kind of
either Mao said or Mao was apparently, people attribute that Mao said political power flows from the barrel of a gun, and yeah, ultimately, like
right.
all law and government power flows from the monopoly of force, and such that
right.
The government will like garnish your wages or something if you break a contract or something along those lines. And you can't like
right. I mean, but what I will say is that there is a Bitcoin has managed for now 10, 12 years to be an effective store of value. Obviously it's got a long way to go before it matches the dollar in terms of that. But there is an element of this where it's just the belief is there, the belief is real, the belief is strong. And that's with money, a lot of the time, that's all that really matters. It's you just have to take on faith that it's going to be worth something. JP Koenig, who's a writer and a researcher who writes about money, he's compared Bitcoin to a chain letter. Of the kind, I don't want to say scam, but like a chain letter where you basically, you receive a letter and it says, if you, God, I'm not going to be able to do this, right? I mean, basically what you're doing is you're saying like, I am taking on this thing, this object, this Bitcoin, based on the belief that I will be able to sell it for more money at some point in the future. And the fact that it's worked for 10 years is a pretty impressive. I don't think we should diminish how impressive like a feat that is. It's got, as I say, it's got a long way to go before it will be able to continue doing that. It makes it slightly different from what its original intention was to be used as like currency in place of the dollar.
Right.
But you can see like where the reason I bring all this up is because I think the place, as you sort of hint at in your earlier question, I think the place that Web3 seems to have some obvious set of uses is in the world of finance. And I think maybe some of that is, so-called regulatory arbitrage, that basically they're using Web3 tools, what they call DeFi or decentralized finance, to make gobs of money before the SEC is able to come in and like properly regulate them. But my understanding is that there are, and I'm not going to be able to come up with any examples because this is a world I know very little about. But people I trust seem to think that there are specific financial tools that are just better done on and with the blockchain. Whether that ends up being the case in the long term is an open question. There's a good piece by Steve Randy Waldman that I recommend people read, where he basically makes the case. The big debate in this is between people who think that Web3 is, just to go back to the title of my newsletter, who think that Web3 is total bullshit, that nothing's ever going to happen with it, the technology is vaporware, that the promises being made about it are nothing. And there's people who think that it's the future of all humankind and all human organization, and the whole world is going to be reorganized around the blockchain. And Waldman's basic argument is that it's not the technology is not bullshit, that there is that there are things that you can do with this that are new and interesting and worthwhile, but that it's not it's unlikely that it's going to revolutionize the way the entire world works. That it's a lot more likely that what you get is the integration of certain blockchain concepts, blockchain software, and token ideas to the financial system that already exists. And I think arguably we're kind of already along that path. This year and last year was a year when a lot of major financial institutions bought up cryptocurrency. And one thing that a lot of sort of crypto skeptics have noted in the last few months is that Bitcoin now basically follows the market. That it's no longer a useful hedge against your investments, because it rises with the market and it falls with the market. And maybe it's a hedge against inflation or something. But at some point, it's like, I don't know, why I personally, as a guy who just needs to save for retirement, would put money into Bitcoin instead of an index fund. It's not at all clear to me.
Yeah, and yeah, that's sort of like the like libertarian ethos of that Bitcoin seemed to have like been founded with, of like no central authority, no central bank, no central government printing the money or something. I don't know. It seems that I've gotten very far away from that. I mean, it's a store of value. I mean, it seems like a speculative asset to me that rises or falls based on you know, the madness of crowds, and if like the Chinese state government says they're going to kick out all the people who are mining it, and then it falls 20%. So if you would put your money in an index fund, you know, it wouldn't be or even if you just kept cash under the mattress or something, it's not, and you live in a stable government, it's not going to go down in value 20% in one day or something. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It's all very strange. But did you see the latest NFT news that broke just a couple hours ago, on December 16th, that Melania Trump is getting into the NFT game? Um,
No, I mean, I can't say I'm surprised. I mean, I'm only surprised it took her so long.
Yeah, well, you know, she's long been a patron of the arts, and yeah, so it's very strange. It's real. She tweeted from her official account. She's doing something, an NFT of her eyes, and her eyes are cobalt blue, according to the press release, and iconic enough
Okay.
that people are somehow going to buy this. But there was something strange about it, where it seemed like it was the whole thing, as I understood with NFTs, was like each one was individualized, and then it, you know,
Mm.
so with all this weird crap you see on Twitter with like animals with like different hats and different tattoos and stuff, so each one was a little different. But then if they're trading on Melania Trump's famous, you know, piercing cobalt blue eyes, and then it seems like there's that you can only make one of those. So I was a little unclear about this, but maybe there's just like different shades of blue or something. Anyway, the Trumps are getting into the crypto game,
Yeah.
and so that either indicates that, like, you know, the future is smooth sailing for crypto, or like, okay, the grifters and sort of like the mid-level grifters are getting in, and so now it like the bubble is really going to pop pretty soon, because, you know, they're really appealing to the real morons who want to buy Melania's cobalt blue eye NFT at this point.
Yeah.
So, you know, probably the smart investor should try to liquidate as best they can.
I mean, it's not just Melania. I mean, the thing that is kind of getting to me is the celebrities, athletes. I mean, Michael Jordan now has some kind of NFT thing they just announced. Reese Witherspoon announced a couple weeks. I mean, when I say I don't, I have no idea if Reese Witherspoon has any clue what an NFT is, if she even knows that that her account was tweeting about NFTs. Like, you know, I think there's a lot of sort of celebrity money out there looking for ways to trade on fame, and the NFT craze is a pretty good one. It, to me, yes, I would take that as a sign to get out. Melania, like all this, it just doesn't seem sustainable to me. And like, look, frankly, like the art sucks too. I have always thought of myself as a kind of like postmodern, you know, theory guy. It's sort of like, oh no, like the quality of art is based on cultural whatever. But actually, the NFT thing has convinced me the opposite, because I think partly just in the sense
So
that it's like,
there are the objectivity of aesthetics has been proven, because you can see that the art that NFT collectors trade is so
I mean, maybe
bad.
I'm just getting old. Right. Well, I think part of like, maybe I should put it this way. It's like setting aside the objective quality. It's like, you know, contemporary art, for all that it itself, alongside NFTs, is a sort of party for money laundering and kind of financial chicanery. You can trace its lineage from, you know, literally millennia of not just Western but global art. And it's not that NFTs don't have some relationship to like art elsewhere around the world, but in the context of like social one-upsmanship, like it's one thing to go buy a George Condo or you know, a Damien Hirst or whatever, to impress the pretty young thing who has a art history degree or whatever. But like, who are you going to impress with your absolutely hideous, like street art inflected, like, you know, like ape babe or whatever? But look, as I say this, like clearly some people are impressed. But you know, I think that in order for me to feel like NFTs have a real future, I think they need to like connect themselves a little bit more with the kind of general flow of high culture, because I think that's like art is an effective money laundering scheme because it locks in, like you can plug it into like the way rich people want to think of themselves and how they want to be around themselves. And NFTs just, like, again, we're going off vibes here, but NFTs just sort of scream poser to me. They just scream sued. Like, that's dumb people like these. That's what it seems like.
Yeah. And so I want to mention something that so I taped an episode yesterday with David Reese, who hosts Election Profit Makers, and we talked a little bit about Elon Musk because he's obsessed with him. And I commented, I can't believe Elon Musk hasn't made his own cryptocurrency or NFT or something because his audience seems so aligned with that. And then the next day I read your piece. Somehow I missed that Elon Musk said that Web3 is bullshit. But if he just changes his mind with that, surely he can make like $1 billion selling the Elon coin or whatever to his rabid following base. So that is somewhat strange that this guy who sort of has this like huckster, like populist, online, like 420 is 69 is funny, like epic bacon kind of thing, is just for whatever reason thinks that Web3 is bullshit, and so it's not cashed in by making the Elon whatever Elon coin or whatever. So yeah, I don't know. So it's all very strange.
Well, he did. I mean, he was. You remember earlier this year he was playing around with Bitcoin. He was saying we're going to buy $1 billion worth of Bitcoin from Tesla, and then like 3 weeks later he was like, actually Bitcoin is really bad for the environment, so we're not going to do that.
Oh, right.
And
yeah.
I'm pretty sure he made a ton of money, and Tesla made a ton. I mean, it seems like he doesn't need his own cryptocurrency because he can do this. He can do whatever he would do with the crypto story. He can do with Tesla stock and with the Bitcoin that he holds, basically.
That's true.
Which is, I mean, as the Matt Levine, Elon Musk theory of markets.
I mean, he is one of the co-founders of PayPal. Like cryptocurrency seems like trying to dethrone PayPal, but PayPal works pretty well, and like it takes like 1.8% or something cut, and then when you compare it to all the bizarre externalities of cryptocurrency, like the waste of electricity and the fact that you might have to pay $150 to withdraw your $100, like maybe like we should just like tax PayPal more, regulate it more. But they basically did it, and all the banks have their own versions of PayPal, like like Bank of America has something called Zelle, and so like it's sort of like this problem has been more or less solved, and Elon Musk played a key role in that. So I guess he sort of has a vested interest. I don't know if he still has PayPal stock, but he he has a vested interest in like the old regime not being toppled, right? I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So okay, let's talk about let's skip over cancel culture because I've talked about that too much on this.
You've talked about it way too. We've all talked about it way too.
Yeah, much. But you do have a good piece. Well, I'll just mention the piece is cancel culture over that I think makes some salient points and people should check it out. But let's end talking about this piece that you wrote that I really loved. I thought it was really fun and sent it to multiple people saying you got to check this out. 90s dad thrillers, a list. So this does not have to do with your normal beat, but so since you're in the Substack space, you can write whatever you want without anyone canceling you or whatever, or even just saying don't write this. But it's a great piece. It's all about a genre of movies that sort of grew in the 80s and 90s and then faded away after 9/11 that you categorize as 90s dad thrillers. So can you talk about this piece?
Yeah. So I should say first that I was actually inspired to write this by a podcast that anybody who finds this stuff interesting should listen to, which is John Gann's and Jamel Bouie's podcast, Unclear and Present Dangers. I had a kid last year. My son was born in November. He just turned 1 last month. And after he was born, I spent a lot of time staying up late or having to be up and around at weird hours. I was getting very little sleep. And there's, you spend a lot of time just sort of like holding your baby, and what better thing to do when you do that than watch movies? But because you're so messed up and so weird, whatever, I wanted a very specific kind of movie. I wanted a movie that like maybe I'd seen before, or if I hadn't seen it before, it was not overly complicated. I had a very clear sense of what was happening. It was engaging. It was efficient. It was like competently made. I wasn't going to be annoyed that it was bad. And that I could sort of like gather what was happening without needing to pay, it couldn't be like no subtitles, I'm not going to watch Bergman on 2 hours of sleep. And what I ended up watching was these movies that were basically, I think of as sort of classics of my childhood, which are movies that star guys like Harrison Ford, who play, some version of lawyer, you know, government drone, who gets caught up in some bigger conspiracy or terrorist attack or something like that, maybe falsely accused of something. And over the course of about 90 minutes to 2 hours, and very rarely longer than 2 hours, which is great, he sort of, defends himself and looks stern and fights off the bad guys or the conspiracy or whatever, and wins. And I think of these, I call these dad thrillers, like, because I think they were sort of marketed towards dads. Like, I think that the point was to make movies that fathers could feel like they were watching something just a little bit sophisticated, because they tend to feature dads. Most of the main characters are like middle-aged guys who are family men who have like sons or daughters. And see, because I was a dad, I was like watching, it's like the first thing, maybe this was a biological imperative. The first thing I thought of when I had a son was like, I gotta watch some submarine movies. Like get me Hunt for Red October right away. So I knew that John and Jamel were starting this podcast, and I was like, I had actually sort of in my head been like, well, maybe I'll do like a series of newsletters about each of these movies, and I was like, well, that's just going to be too close to their podcast. But I had all these thoughts, I had all this stuff in my head about, because I'd watched so many of them, noticing like parallels or whatever. So I wrote sort of what I think I called notes towards the theory of the dad thriller, which is just some like, there's some diagrams in there for people who are visual learners, just to try to categorize as many of them as I possibly could. Just trying to think through the kind of themes and tropes and ideas that are going on.
Yeah. And yeah, so piece is very clever and amusing. And yeah, you have some charts and graphs. One potential breakdown is whether the protagonist, who's always a man, has a professional degree or does not have a professional degree, and then whether he is an agent of the state or not an agent of the state. And you would list like 8 or so movies under each one, and in like a 4-quadrant kind of thing. And yeah, and so Harrison Ford is maybe the key person in this world, because he was in so many of these movies. And I guess Air Force One is a little different because he's the president, not just like the desk. So often it was the desk jockey, and maybe the Jack Ryan stuff was the origin of that. The desk jockey who somehow is forced to go into the world of action and adventure and like use his smarts, but also like, use physical violence and stuff to solve the problem. And Air Force, and so there's various permutations and exceptions, and you have a subcategory movies where the president is a character and seems like a cool guy. So that'd be Air Force One, Independence Day, Deep Impact. And they also talk about how often these had at least a gloss of like intellectualism or sort of confronting some sort of like societal problem that America was facing in the 90s. So it wasn't like a Michael Bay, it wasn't like, the Michael Bay Transformers or something where it's just like, spectacle on the screen and total nonsense. Like it seemed to have like a serious, like a sense of seriousness about it that maybe was just like skin deep, but
there's like a sort of sophistication. Like I think I do think that part of it, there's a marketing aspect there where it's like, you can imagine it being like a date night movie. Like it's an action movie, but there's like enough sort of political or legal or whatever sophistication to it that it feels serious in a way that maybe you could convince your significant other to watch it with you, in a way you otherwise wouldn't. And I think because of that too, I didn't get into this super much in the piece, but this is something that Jamel and John are definitely doing on their podcast. There's a lot of like interesting sort of political readings you can do of these movies, especially right now, 2021. I feel like the 90s is looming very large in our imaginations, not just because there's a sort of cultural 90s revival, but just trying to figure out what happened after the fall of the Soviet Union that led us to this. And watching a movie like Air Force One, where it's, this is like Air Force One in particular, I recommend people watch with an eye towards sort of 90s, the pathologies of 90s liberalism, because this is a movie about a president who gives a speech in the very beginning of the movie, gives this stirring speech that we're supposed to admire about how America is going to intervene more often in foreign affairs. Anytime there's any kind of humanitarian crisis, America is going to be there. And then presents the most politically irrational villains I've ever seen in a movie ever. I think they're like Kazakh irredentists, but they're Russian nationalists too, but they're also communists. And they the only thing they seem to want to do is like free this one general from prison. And it's just like it's a weird inversion. It's like the movie's very similar to Die Hard because it's about a guy trapped on a plane trying to kill terrorists versus a guy trapped in a building trying to kill terrorists. Die Hard, which is one of my favorite movies, has this great like the politics of Die Hard are really funny because it sets up the idea that you've got these German, political terrorists, and it turns out they're just after the money. Like it's a very Reagan movie. It's like a very 80s, like, no, everybody just wants money. That's what we want to do. Whereas, the 90s, the 90s version of this is like, money's not even, they don't want to think about money. They want to talk about politics. They want to be taken seriously about international politics, but there's just nothing there. It's just fluff. There's like nothing to like hold on to. It's kind of this totally fake thing. Gary Oldman is like great as the totally nuts, and Harrison Ford is great. I mean, it's a fun movie. Like, I don't mean to like come on and be like, don't watch, Air Force One is politically evil. It's fucking great. It rules. But it's just really funny to sort of watch it from the perspective of 2021 and be like, is that really what like Hollywood thought Americans wanted politics to be? What American politics were? Like, was that what they thought was going on? It's another movie actually that's a little bit on the outside of this category, but I also really love and has this sort of interesting thing is Contact, where Jodie Foster like maybe receives a signal from aliens and maybe travels to visit those aliens. It's like a lot of stuff about, it feels very much like a movie about a country wrestling with kind of a post-historical state where there's no massive national enemy or ideological enemy to be waging war against. And the way these kinds of 90s ideas leak out into what are, in general, like very well made, very entertaining, like extremely competent Hollywood products. And I say that because it's like, compared to the kind of stuff you get on Netflix these days, these sort of half-made streaming things that are there to be watched while you're on your phone, like these are very like proper movies. To watch them try to wrestle with what we can now identify as like historically specific problems is an interesting intellectual exercise, on top of getting to watch Harrison Ford shoot people and jump out of planes and all the good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, people should definitely check out this piece if this conversation is interested them at all. And yeah, there's plenty to discuss here. And yeah, actually, I started listening to Jamel and John's podcast, but then at one point they were like, if you haven't seen okay, what is the first movie they do, the submarine movie?
Hunt for Red October.
Yeah, if you haven't seen Hunt for Red October in a long time, like you should really pause and rewatch it before listening to this. And I was like, I don't think I've seen that since high school, and maybe I didn't even see the entire thing at that point, because I had almost no memory of the characters they're talking about. So I was like, okay, I guess I'll rewatch Hunt for Red October before I listen to the rest of this podcast. And yeah, the Contact is an interesting one. Actually, over the summer, I got into the Blank Check podcast which I know Jamel has been on, where they review the filmographies of various directors who had like an early hit and then were given like free reign to do whatever they wanted. And so they were doing Zemeckis, and they taught the episode on Contact was very interesting, and maybe you want to rewatch it. And I haven't rewatched it yet, but yeah, it had, sort of the fact that there was like, in the many movies from, before 1989, the villain was like the Soviets, the commies, or something. And then that ended. And then, so what was the threat? Who was the villain? And maybe it needed to come, something from outer space, or a different civilization or something would be the threat. Or it was often, these like rogue terrorists, or someone who was like an something or other in the Soviet Union, and then was like a renegade and had their own like thing,
right.
thing to axe to grind, and a lot of stuff with like IRA, someone like doing a bad Irish accent. That's another thing you identify as often the villain is.
There's a lot of the designer David Rudnick came up with this word Nokia core to describe this set of movies that I think are all basically dad thrillers, which is like Ronin, The First Mission Impossible, The Peacemaker, which are basically all movies about like nukes getting passed around Eastern Europe and like guys in Eastern Europe in like black markets for nukes, which was obviously some level of cultural and political anxiety at the time, that there would, that some former Soviet country would let a nuke fall into the hands of, say, the IRA or whoever. These are your bad guys in that case are always like shady, terrorist guys or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and where what is the motivation of the bad guys, since they no longer believe in the triumph of Marxist Leninism? Are they doing it for? It's actually some financial scam or something, or what exactly?
Right.
And then you do talk a little bit about sort of like, what happened to the death, or you talk a little bit about why this ended, and 9/11 would be one reason, where suddenly there was once again this actual external threat, not like a washed up a Kazakh terrorist or something. And then I guess various other reasons why movies changed, and so I highly recommend this piece for anyone. And it's, I think people who have stuck with the show have often like interested in the way like culture shape, like materialism shapes culture, and just like this lines up with my interest. So yeah, highly recommended. Okay, anything else
Thank you
you want to say or plug? Or
no, no, I mean, just the newsletter, maxread.substack.com. Please, it's all currently free. I'm going to start introducing paid stuff next year, but for now, see if you like it. I hope that people do.
Yeah, so Read Max by Max Read, maxread.substack.com. Check it out. This is a podcast which also exists online. It is something you could subscribe to or rate and review or smash that button doing something or other, and that is all appreciated or whatever. So Max, thanks for coming back on, and thanks to our viewers and listeners.
Yeah,
and we'll see you again next time.